Good evening, I'm Jorge Cardenas, and I am your host in this video series called Healing Addiction is Fast and Easy. I thought I was going to be able to tell you everything I needed to tell you about becoming a good sponsor in the first two videos, but I found it necessary to make it a third video in how to become a good sponsor. And I'll begin with two stories that I simply cannot avoid but to relate them to you. As I have mentioned before, I'm a physician who practices OBGYN, but I became interested in addiction because of my weight problem back in the day, and I was able to conquer it until about 9 years ago when I discovered or became aware of the creative force. But recently, an acquaintance of mine, a very successful physician, and successful in terms of his education, in terms of his family, had 5 children, had a kind and beautiful wife, had a good reputation in the city, recently committed suicide. And this person of age 45, if we look at the outcome, the suicide, using the creative force, we have to realize that that the suicide being the outcome had to be initiated by a thought. And the thought had to be one such as life is too hard or is not worth living. Even though from the outside, the rest of us are able to, what we are able to see, we see in terms of the success that the world had to offer. And the reason I mention this doctor is because in the American culture, we are often trained that after 18, the child is out of the house, and that we are no longer required to get involved. The second point that I wanted to mention is that at one point, I have a wonderful father who has been, by pure luck, I say pure luck because he's really not intellectually aware of what he teaches, has been able to teach me some things, and to such depth that it is until now that I am discovering the wisdom that was provided to me without it being given intentionally. It's just he was repeating the thoughts that he acquired throughout his life. But one time I was asking him about my children, and I said, "Dad, when did you stop worrying about them?" He looks at me, smiles, and he said, "And how are you doing?" The point that I want to bring about is that even up to this point, when I have achieved the success that most people would, no, I would say most people would envy, but a reasonable amount of success, either intellectually, physically, monetarily, I consider myself successful all around. Most people would envy, even up to this point, he continues to worry about me, which pointed out the purpose of this conference, of the third part, in that it really needs to be an obvious answer to most of us, because most of us don't realize this, is that how long are we supposed to be training those whom we have been given the charge to train? Until 18? Until they are financially successful? Until they are independent? I'm almost certain that if we take a second to think about the first example I gave you, which was the successful physician that committed suicide, I'm almost certain that at this point his dad and his mom, late at night, lay in bed awake wondering, what did we do wrong? Or what did we fail to do? And so what I want to point out to you is that in the process of training the addicted person to become a successful person, one could set personal goals, temporary goals, but I want you to realize that what it requires is a lifetime relationship to this individual. Now, you may not be related to a particular individual by blood. Let's say, for example, you are helping an addicted friend and you are going to be helping them to get rid of the addiction by causing them to change their thinking. But in order to become a good sponsor, one must begin by acknowledging that we can be part of the process. It continues with the fact that we now have to recognize what a bad thought is and what a good thought is, and we must acquire the good thinking. The expression that my dad used to say is, you cannot teach cooking if you don't know how to cook. Still sounds crisp in my mind, because if you do not know what the correct thinking is, you cannot teach what the correct thinking is. And the last part that I want to tell you is that when you choose to become involved, and when you choose to train the following generation, I want you to realize that it's for a lifetime. You cannot stop training the next generation. And you do it by omission or by commission. But by every action that you have, by every word that you say, by every intervention that you do, you are going to be sending a message to the next generation. Is it the correct message? And so the question is, are you learning the new correct thinking from God? And the neat thing about it is that it then clearly becomes obvious so easily that what happens is that we are in parallel processes. If you think about it, the addicted person has to change from the personal faulty thinking to godly thinking. Now, in order for me to become a good sponsor, I have to change from my worldly thinking to my godly thinking, that God is the one in control and that God leads me and that God teaches me, that I can learn so I can teach the next generation. But the beauty of the whole process is that my relationship to God never ends. It is a constant relationship. And so, moving the process backwards, I want you to realize that in the manner that God treats me is the manner that I am supposed to treat the addicted person. And so when you think about it, of all the second chances that you have received, of all the times that you have granted grace, of all the times that you've been provided beyond measure, when you remember those, that is the grace that you are going to be using to treat the addicted person. And so, from now on, and for the rest of your life, you should not be asking, what should I do in this situation? But what does God want me to do in this particular situation? And it's a constant process that will keep you attached to God for the rest of your life. Have a good night.